But if we don't look after the temperature, that could be as high as 10%, which means every time they open it, they would lose weight. So what I'll do is I'll just tip that down the sink here. So what I'm going to do is if I turn this over here, there's one muscle here, and there's another muscle here, and there's a round muscle that goes through the centre. So what I'm going to do is I will run my knife along the edge there, along the edge, and then along this mark, this line here. Separate that. So what I'll do then is there's a natural seam that is there. Now when we're looking at this meat, what I've got here is I've got fat, I've got muscle, and I've got connective tissue. This shiny skin that is here, that is what makes the meat tough. So for barbecue grill, we must take this off. Wet cook, you can leave it there. We remove that, we have muscle, and then we have the fat. The fat adds flavour. You do need some fat, otherwise the meat can be very, very dry. Whereas you can't get the fat in tenderloin because there's no fat on that tenderloin. So what I'm going to do is I will follow the natural seam that is here and separate this muscle. So what I'll do is I'll just keep following along that edge. And I will follow this one here along here. And I will separate the muscles. So when we're going to separate the muscles, what we should do, we should always cut across the grain. So I'm just going to keep following that seam down.
What's that?
Knuckle. And I use my hand, push down there. So I've washed my hands since I was in the room next door.
Where's your voice? Kerry, we have so much English you never hear.
Right now they take off already.
Huh?
They take off already.
Take off.
Don't be afraid. No, because they owe me money, then they
Who
take
owe you?
off. Huh?
Who?
So I take that muscle off.
Rico is your customer. It's yours.
And go back to here.
We are starting with a new short rib.
And I'll remove this muscle here. What I'm doing here is all the muscles go in different directions. We always must follow and cut across the grain. With the connective tissue in there. By following that through and removing that connective tissue, we finish up with a very, very nice piece of meat. Okay, so what I'm doing now is I've removed the muscles. Now what I'll do is I will take off the connective tissue to make this meat more tender. So what, we must have good sharp knives to not waste the product. All this would not be wasted. The chefs would use every piece of that. Any questions we go through?
No.
If I put this on the barbecue,
What is used for?
sorry,
What is used for?
we will use that for mince or for soup. The soup would always be a stew, but not so much for stew, mainly for soup.
For mincing?
Or mincing, yes, but you'd have to have other meat to go with it, naturally. Okay. So if I put this on the barbecue and I cook that and I gave it to you to eat, I come back in say 2 hours, and you're still trying to chew. It's very, very difficult to chew and eat that piece of meat. So what we should do is always take that off. Another trace of it.
It's like this.
Thank you. Now when you have a look in the, can you see the lines in that meat? The meat has lines in it. Can you see? Look into the meat. See the lines?
Yeah.
So which way do I cut that meat? Always. Always cut across the grain will make it more tender. So what I do then is I follow that through. So this, by taking this connective tissue off, and it's very, very thin here, so I may have to waste a little bit of meat there to get that off. And I won't take it all off because I'm not going to cut it all. I'm only going to work on this front section. So I take this off, and then I can think about slicing this meat.
Why the beef there some red and
Different
some
colour.
Yeah.
It's because it's just come out and it has been frozen sometimes, I think, and so you get a different colour. But that will, later on, that will become all red. I think we'll have a look in the future.
Okay.
Nothing wrong with that meat. So what I do now is I will slice. And when I'm going to slice, if this is too big, I would take parts off that. That would not be wasted. So I'm going to take that off and I will use it later on. What I'll do then is if I cut that across the grain, if I cut it straight, it will be smaller. I'm going to cut it from here and make it bigger. So you can see there, we're going to get now a beautiful piece of meat. As long as we take that off, eh? So we'll use that one, eh?
Yeah.
Sorry, smaller piece of meat. Now these smaller pieces we can go for steak, or if I want to cut this one here for stir fry. This goes into the quail or the wok, and it's virtually impossible for that meat to be tough. Okay, so all this little piece of meat would not be wasted. You can go in for stir fry. Stir fry goes into the wok very quickly. Wok, quail, whatever you call it, I'm not sure what you call it. But it goes in, cooked very quickly and comes back out. So what we would do is all of this knuckle, we would take all this connective tissue off. Now you can see how thick that connective tissue is in there. See how thick it is? Very thick at that end. But all that has to come off. But it's cheaper. A little bit more work, but it's cheaper. So what we're looking at there is we will follow that down, and I would take all of that off, and I would take all of this off. This part here, there is 3 muscles. There is 1, 2, and then 3 under there. I would do exactly the same as what I've done with all of this. I would take off the connective tissue.
Sorry. There is some connective tissue, but why do you don't take it out? You only take the other parts out.
If I put this back together again, that goes there, that goes there, and this one fitted here.
Yeah.
Now, if I cut it like that, first of all it would be too big, and secondly, some muscles don't always go the same direction. So by taking that off, I've then got all the muscles in one direction. This one here, see I've had to turn that and slice it across. So what I'm doing here is separating the muscles, and then I get a firm piece of meat. When I say that, I mean that here, when I'm going to slice, that meat, I haven't got any seams in that. It's one solid piece of meat which will hold together. And it's all cut across the grain. Now, I'm not sure about this meat, but you can see in the knuckle, you will get a little bit of marbling. Now, cannot be guaranteed as always being there, but sometimes in the knuckle you do get a little bit of marbling. So whether you go for a big slice or a smaller slice, you've got that variation. And if you wanted to roast it, you could also roast that as well. And go back to this muscle here for roasting. Take all that connective tissue off and then slice that, or you can have it for roasting. So you can see there. Now if I said to you, what can we do with the knuckle? You would then go back to your notes. And in there, remember the chart? You can have a look at the knuckle and you can see exactly what you're going to do. So, what I do is I've got this here to measure. So if I want to cut shabu shabu, from here to there is the width. So I'd put that there and I would cut that there. That is the height. So I can take off the extra and then I put my knife in that groove. That is the thickness. So whether it's going to be a large piece of meat or a small piece of meat for stir fry, I can measure and get it right exactly every time. We have to do that to make sure we have the consistency with the product. But you can see now that you cut it all across the grain, and this one here, if we cook that, cannot be cut because we've taken the connective tissue off. See this connective tissue? If I left that on there and we cooked it, you could not eat it. I've taken that off, and now we've got a nice piece of meat that you can chew very, very easily without paying a high price. This is not tenderloin, it's not strip loin or cube roll. It's a cheaper cut of meat, a non-loin cut, and I think that the price difference here between the cube roll and the strip loin and the tenderloin would have to be 80% maybe, cheaper. So all of what you have to do is have the good knives, the skills to separate the muscles, take the connective tissue out and slice it and finish up with a very, very good quality piece of meat. Question?
What is the difference between the fat and the knuckle?
The fat
Knuckle.
Marbling.
Marbling. Oh, marbling. The fat, when we feed the animal on grain, the first fat that goes on is on the outside of the animal's body. So this here is the fat on the outside. The next fat that goes on is in the stomach. The third fat that goes on is the marbling. So that's why the marbling takes time to get in there. So when we're looking at that, this one here, a little bit, but this may not be grain fed, but it has got a little bit. But we can't sell it as grain fed because it hasn't been fed for a minimum of 70 days grain fed. So if the animal gets if the food, or we go through a drought, the first fat that disappears is the marbling. The marbling will go. So the first fat goes on to the outside of the body, then the stomach, and then the marbling. When we go in reverse, the first fat that disappears is the marbling that disappears first. So the marbling is the intermuscular fat, the fat that's in the muscle, that is marbling. This is not marbling. Not marbling at all.
So it makes the meat is better, right?
That's right. Because when you cook it,
we have the fat inside of the meat, so it makes the meat softer.
It makes the meat soft because it cooks down, the fat disappears, but also it adds flavour. In a piece of meat that's very, very lean, there's not a lot of flavour. You need the fat to give you the flavour. But everybody doesn't want to eat fat because they say, oh, no good for my diet. But you do need some fat to put the moisture, because if you've got a very, very lean piece of meat like this, you have to watch how you cook it, otherwise it could become dry.
Okay, so next question. Because we cannot control the marbling inside, right? So if the knuckle have let's say it's not consistency on the marbling